Hello and good morning, everyone. How are you? It is Christy. It is Sunday, where I am. I don't know where it is, what it is, where you are, but good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you. I hope you are doing well. I'm gonna say up front that I don't know how this is gonna go the full 2 hours. I know I say that and then I end up babbling for 2 hours, but really today I don't know if that's gonna be the case. Maybe people will have things to say in the chat that will draw it out. But I had to pick a pet. I didn't have to. I don't have to do anything. My Sunday show is my Sunday show. But I decided to pick a bit of a pet peeve of mine to discuss today because, well, I mean, with the news of Trump and the bounty and everything else, there's always so many things to choose from when you have a fascist trying to expand fascism in government, it tends to take up a lot of time and energy. But one of the things we need to do in 2020 is defeat Trump. I'm going to turn this other way. There we go. So am I centered? I think I'm centered. Okay. And I know that a lot of people were literally traumatized. Like, they have a very bad association when they think back on election night, because the polls, as we're going to look at, it showed the national vote going to Clinton. And that's what happened. Polls in the states where Trump won by less than, say, 20,000 votes in a state of, 5 or 10 million people were within the margin of error. So people thought the election was going to go one way, just sort of a Trump pulling an inside straight within the margin of error. And actually one of the polls not even like being within the margin of error in terms of the national turnout. But anyway, he got, things fell into place where he got the electoral college vote. Delegates, sorry. He got the necessary delegates to win. And people turned around and said the polls got it wrong. As if the polls predict how many electoral delegates people are going to have. There's a kind of a two-step process there, right? And I'm seeing this more and more as we're getting closer to the election, where people who should really know better, people who are quite smart, keep telling people, don't trust the polls. Don't trust the polls. Don't trust the polls. The polls in 2016 got it wrong. The polls were trash. Completely forgetting 2018. Completely forgetting that 2018 was very accurate in terms of its polling predictions. And it's also, quite frankly, anti-science. If you said the polls got it wrong, you're just showing me you don't understand what a margin of error is. And I was so frustrated. There was some guy who was working for NPR. I should actually track this guy down. On Morning Joe last week saying in 2016 the polls got it wrong. No, they didn't. You don't understand how polling works. And you can see my rant is coming through. And the reason it's so frustrating to me is that it's frustrating to me because it's anti-science. And it's not nearly as dangerous as the anti-science associated with anti-vaxxers. Okay, obviously, attacking vaccinations, which, yes, again, within a certain population, there's a certain amount of people who are going to have a reaction. But in the aggregate, we could not have our modern society if we did not have vaccines. So I don't want to put this anywhere near on par with that problem, but it is anti-science. It is anti-math. It is anti-understanding basic probability. And so I want better from the left. I want us to be better. I want us to do better. And I don't want us to lie to people in order to terrorize them to get out to vote. Because the other part of this, right? I love the grin. So the other part, one part of it is anti-science. It is just anti-mathematics to attack the polls irrationally and inappropriately like this. The other thing is, there's an excuse that's made, oh my gosh, in 2016, people saw the polling, people saw the polling, that Clinton was going to win, so they didn't bother to vote. There's zero evidence for that kind of thinking. As someone who has studied political behavior for, over a decade now, I've never seen a polling response or hosted a single focus group or conducted a single post-election interview. Now remember, I've been doing qualitative election study in the UK since 2010. Sometimes we talk to 150 people before and after, and some of those people planned to vote before the election, and then they didn't vote for whatever reason, and we asked them about it afterwards. No one has ever said, I looked at the national polls and I just decided I didn't really need to go out because my preferred party was going to win. No one looks at the polls and goes, I don't need to bother to vote because it's already sorted. People don't vote for a lot of reasons. But they're not because the polls told them that the election outcome is a certainty. That's just not a calculation I've ever heard a person make. And even if some people did do that, that is such a minuscule percentage of non-voters as to be irrelevant. You might as well put them in the same category as people who intended to vote but got a flat tire on the way to the polling station. That is probably more likely to happen than someone planning on voting, and then the week before looking at a poll and going, oh, I'm just not going to bother. I'm not going to bother because the polls tell me the election's already done. Now, I get it. Like, there are situations where you live in a constituency where it's so, or a district, and it depends on where you live, but a congressional district or state where it is so much a foregone conclusion which party is going to win that can depress votes, right? But what we know is that close races increase turnout. If you have what they call in the States a sacrificial lamb put up against a Democrat or put up against a Republican, because it's an 80% Democratic district, it's an 80% Republican district. There are Republicans who may not vote because they don't feel like it's worth it, or there might be some Democrats who feel like, oh, I don't have to vote this time because it's safe. But a horse race increases turnout. A horse race does not decrease turnout. And as I'll show you in a moment, here with Clinton and Trump, it was very close. It was within like under 5%, under 3%. So we're going to talk a little bit about why it's inaccurate and also harmful to dismiss and undermine and discredit polls when the real problem is that you don't understand polling or the person you're talking to doesn't understand polling. I want to give you guys some tools and tips and ideas. So let me go ahead and change my screen so you can see what I'm seeing. Hey, there we go. All right, what are you guys saying in the chat? Let's have a little look-see here and see. Actually, you guys are underneath me, so if I want to... hello, I feel like I'm in the Brady Bunch. Hey. Oh, no, I haven't done my screen yet. Sorry. Well, that didn't make any sense to you, did it? Yeah, I was like doing my little Brady Bunch joke. Hey, everyone in the chat down there. Actually, I'm kind of off-center, so maybe what I can do is center myself a little bit more. So I'm right on top of you guys. I'm sure that's where you want me, right? There we go. Hey down there. Hey, chat. Not understanding probability is how casinos work, Flint writes. Oh my gosh, yeah. And why most get confused by quantum physical descriptions. Yeah, too. It's often counterintuitive for most people. You want to know one of my other big pet peeves, or like hobby horses, you say? I really think if we had to choose between teaching kids calculus and probability in high schools, we should teach probability. I mean, calculus, I guess, is far. But, I remember struggling a lot with algebra because I was taught algebra at grade 7. So I was like 12. I had a very difficult time with abstract thinking early on. And I think it would have been far easier at 12 and 13 to play with dice and decks of cards and understand probability from a gambling point of view. And the interesting thing about the history of statistics, this is a completely off topic. This is how I go 2 hours. The Catholic Church initially was very disapproving and condemnatory even of the teaching of probability in that way, because it was thought to be linked or only really relevant to gambling, determining odds and all those sorts of things. And so they actually kind of considered probability not a reputable form of mathematics, and kind of overcoming that was part of the development of probability theories and statistical methods and understandings and things. But yeah, we are, as human beings, we are super sorry, Flint was just saying casinos make money with the exception of Trump's casinos. That's very true. But as human beings, we're super unprepared for probability because of the fact that we have very finite lifespans. So we don't have an opportunity to see things happen over and over and over again. Also, from our sort of human perspective, what we perceive as common sense oftentimes is a mismatch with what probability theory tells us. So a perfect example of the way that our minds are kind of defaulted to not really understand probability intuitively, it's something we have to acquire an understanding of, is the Monty Hall problem. Do you guys know the Monty Hall? Let's talk about the Monty Hall problem before we go on to sampling. But we're going to look at some of my lectures that I used to use teaching. So Monty Hall problem It's actually quite an interesting little thing. It just doesn't seem like it should work, but it does. And I do this sometimes when I have an opportunity to, when it comes into play. All right, so I'm just going to read this out to show how unintuitive probability theory, as Flint was pointing out, can be. The Monty Hall problem is a brain teaser in the form of a probability puzzle loosely based on the American television show Let's Make a Deal, named after the original host of the show, Monty Hall. The problem was posed and solved in a letter by Steve Sylvan to the American statistician in 1975. I was 3 years old in 1975, so, we're still developing these ideas. The puzzle goes like this. Suppose you're on a game show, and you're given the choice of 3 doors. Behind one door is a car, and behind the other 2, goats. You pick a door, say number 1, and the host, who knows what's behind the doors, opens the door, say door number 3, which has a goat. He then says to you, so you've seen the goat, you've got 2 doors closed now. Do you want to pick door number 2? Is it your advantage to switch your choice? So that's not actually really well described. You have 3 doors to pick from. You pick 1. So you have basically, your thinking is, I have a 33% chance of getting it right. So you pick a door, and the goat is revealed. Oh no, you got it wrong, but you get another choice. So now, do you want to, what was it? You pick one door, and the other one's number 1 behind the door opens. Oh, sorry. I got this wrong. You pick a door, say number 1, and the host, who knows what's behind the doors, opens another door, number 3, which has the goat. So you're picking a door, and let's start again. You've got 3 doors. There's 2 goats and a car. They show you, you're in your mind, you go, okay, I'm going to pick door number 2. And they open up door number 1, and it's a goat. All right. And they're like, okay, do you want to now stay with door number 2? Or do you want to swap? Do you want to flip? Do you want to choose door number 1 instead? Because you've already shown door number 3. Our brains think 3 closed doors, 33% chance of getting it right. So when one of the doors is open to us as the reveal, and it's a goat, we still think we have a 33% chance of getting it right now that we know one of the doors is a goat, behind which door. But the fact is, we now actually have a 50-50 chance, not a 33% chance, and it's always to our advantage to swap what door we want. All right? So as it goes on, is it to your advantage to switch whatever door you had in your mind before it goes to the next one, before you have to actually pick out loud? And Savant's response was that the contestant should always switch to the other door, under the standard assumption that contestants who switch have a 2/3 chance of winning the car. It's not 50-50, it's 2/3. While contestants who stick to their initial choice only have 1/3. See, I have to remind myself of these things too. And if, I know it doesn't sound intuitive that you should, you don't know what's behind the door, but you should definitely switch anyway. If you watch videos where they actually run this scenario, you're given 3 doors, you don't have to say your pick, but you're shown a door, and when the door is a goat, always switch, always flip whatever your pick was. If you do that, you're actually more likely to win than if you stick with your original choice. I don't know, that doesn't necessarily make sense in our brains, but probability theory teaches us it does. Marilyn Voss Savant, thank you, Po Mama Sid. I appreciate that. I'm trying to summarize things. I don't want to read Wikipedia out word for word, but don't want to, Marilyn gets total credit for her analysis of this, or her answer. So the Monty Hall problem, go watch videos on that. They actually, like I said, they'll do it over and over again, and it always turns out to be a statistical advantage to whatever door you're going to pick, just switch in your mind. Doesn't even matter, just swap to have a 2/3 chance. So I agree. This was a total tangent, but I think we should teach probability at high schools, when kids are in their teens. You take that away and you understand for the rest of your life that the lottery or scratch-offs, that's just a tax on people who can't do statistics kind of thing. Lenny says, why these doors are not dependent in any way. You don't get an advantage to always pick door 2. Yeah, again, I don't have time to go through all of it. I would really, well, maybe next time, but you should go watch videos. People have prepared videos on this who can explain it better. So I'm trying to think where we want to start with this. Okay, let's just go over the basics. We'll go over my lecture notes from there. And is there a way to close this side? It's so crap. No, it's all these crappy papers on the side, and I don't know how to, what do you call it? Make it go away. Collapse the sidebar. So we're just gonna have to deal. It's a free show. What do you want? Right. Polls take a sample of a group of people, and you can sample like any group. You could go to a company and sample employees. You can go to a university and you can sample students in different departments. You know, you can go and study any group of people. And it kind of doesn't matter what group of people you are going to look to get a sample from, get their attitudes from. The general principles of sampling applies, which is the more alike a group is. So if you've got a room full of 40 middle-aged white guys who all work at the same company, you're going to need a far fewer of them to get a representative sample of the general group. And that's because if you're asking them about their experiences in the company, whatever else, there's not a lot of variation. You know, if they're all kind of like middle management, white guys, you know, all, whatever, you don't need to ever ask every single one of them to get a general flavor of where they're all coming from. It's going to be really disappointing to people, but we're just not that special. So if there is so much I can predict about how you're going to vote by knowing your basic socio-demographic characteristics. If I know you live in the South and you are a married white woman who attends a fundamentalist Christian church every week, I'm going to put money that you're going to vote Republican. I don't even need to know this woman's name or her background. You know, like, okay, let's add that she's got a family. I don't need to know anything about if her marriage is happy, any of that. There are just so many factors there that allow me to make that prediction that, you know, more often than not, 8 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, she will be voting Republican. On the other hand, you know, if you tell me that a group of people, you know, you've got elderly Black women who also attend church on a regular basis and live anywhere, frankly, I'm going to predict that they're going to vote for the Democratic Party candidate. And so this idea that sampling, people will say things like, we would like more goat content. So I'll get back to goats. We are just so shaped by the socio-demographic factors in our lives. And sometimes those change over time. For instance, in the 1980s and the early 1990s, having a college degree would actually be more likely to be associated with voting for the Republicans. And that's because people who went to universities mostly in the 80s and 90s is overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly middle class, and they obtained degrees that allowed them to earn enough money to care about how much they paid in taxes. So it made sense at the time for all the hysteria about communism and Marxism in the classroom. For a very long time, especially if you were white, having a college degree was associated with voting for Republicans. Now, it's drifting the opposite way. And we can definitely see the influence of higher education. And when we talk about a demographic, you look at the split between women, white working class women, and that means working class, again, in this situation, white women without some college or a college degree, and their voting preferences versus the same group of women but with a college degree. You can see that splits, and that college now has a liberalizing effect, a left-leaning effect on people. So, I don't know, is Stalin trying to kiss your girlfriend now? What is it? What is going on in my chat? So we don't have to ask 10,000 people a survey question. We don't need to. If you've never been surveyed, it's not that you are not represented in surveys. You just need to accept that you're not that special, and that there are like literally hundreds, thousands of you out there that are indistinguishable in terms of what survey polling people want to know. You know, they're not interested in your particular childhood stuff. They're like, who are you going to vote for? When are you going to vote? Do you like this? Do you not like this? Surveys are very blunt instruments, you know. So the more similar a population is, the less of the smaller the sample can be, and still represent the views of the general group. Now, if you have what we'd say a heterogeneous, if you've got a population that has a lot of different parts to it, you've got people of different ages and different backgrounds and different ethnicities and different educations and different income levels, and they live in different places, all these other things, then you need a sort of like you need a critical mass sample from each of those groups. And generally in statistics, that ends up being a number of cases, or an N, of at least 250 for a subpopulation. So when you do see samples sizes on a poll on the overall average of like maybe 3,000 or 4,000 people, oftentimes they'll be doing that so they have enough people within the subpopulations. Like if you want to look at things by high school or education, if you want to look at things by ethnicity, if you want to look at things by region in particular, and say, okay, how do people in this part of the country think, then you need a sort of minimum number for things to be statistically valid. And all of that assumes you have a good method of actually pulling people out. And so first thing is, yes, sampling itself, you don't have to have big numbers, and you can get a smaller part of a small group that represents the whole. Now, a little bit counterintuitively, I think, it's actually easier to get a national sample than it is to get a state sample. Why is that? Why would it be easier to get a representative sample of 330 million people than it would be to, say, get a representative sample of like 1.5 million? The way that surveys work is, again, you know, you don't have to have certain, when you have a whole country of people to work from, you have more opportunities to ask people who fit that profile, right? They have the characteristics you're looking for. And so with survey response rates going down, it's getting harder and harder for survey companies to actually get people to take surveys. So when you're trying to get a national sample, you can get a lot of rejections and still find people to say yes who will be generally representative of that sort of group that you're looking to analyze. So if you're going for a national survey, you can ask people across the country, and your response rates really won't be as affected because you can just kind of go looking for more. If, however, your pool of 1.5 million people, or like in the state of Wisconsin, I think it's like 5.5 million people, if you get really high rejection rates for people who don't want to participate in your survey, you have a much smaller pool to work from. And there are also, you need to be more representative of the things on the state level. So rural, urban, and education and stuff. And so it's just oftentimes state polls have a slightly larger margin of error. It's just more difficult and expensive to find 3,000 people to answer a poll in Wisconsin as opposed to, like 750 or 1,000. Which is because you have to get people to call and do the polling and all that stuff. It's very expensive to do surveys. So on the national level, when you look at it, it's easier to get that participation than it is on the statewide. So this is, like, again, kind of counterintuitive, but something to remember. So when we sample, how do we know if we can generalize from the people that we've talked to the wider population? And what we use are probability sampling methods. We create an opportunity for everyone in the population that we're interested in has a known chance of being selected. And then this one goes through the ways in which survey companies balance completely random population, a completely random sample, and they try to control it. So, for instance, you might have a stratified sampling, like you want to make sure if you're interviewing university students about their satisfaction with their university experience, you might find that students in psychology and sociology and the social sciences understand that response rates are important, so they're more likely to complete your survey, but then it's kind of tilted toward that group. So how you can actually stratify your sample to make sure you get a more even distribution, yada, yada, yada. And then I go through how you do it with multi-stage cluster sampling and all these kinds of things. Anything else here? Yes. Limits of generalizing. One of them is you can only generalize from the population from which the sample has been drawn. So I can't tell you anything about Canadians based on a sample of all American respondents. And also I can't tell you anything about those opinions except for the time in which they were taken. So people will look at the polls now and go, ooh, look, Joe Biden is up 12 points in June. Look, Hillary Clinton was up this much at the same time in June last time, and she lost. Like, well, yeah, but that doesn't matter. Like, the June polls only tell us about where people are in June. The June polls cannot tell us where people will be in November. And I think this is also one of the mistakes, the cognitive errors that people make, thinking that somehow a poll taken today is supposed to predict events 5 months in the future. That's a bit like saying where the stock market is today, it will be in the exact same place on November 6th or 7th, or I don't know when election day is. I should, because I have to do absentee ballot long before then. And that's just not how it works. It doesn't work that way with predicting the stock market any more than it does with predicting election outcomes. But there is this weird calculation that people seem to make that if the polls 4 years ago are saying similar things to the polls now, that the results of the polls from 2016 will somehow allow us to predict the results of the 2020 election. These don't, no. You can't look at 2016 and say, ooh, Hillary Clinton was ahead. That's a completely different race with completely different candidates in a completely different situation. They're not comparable. And they're certainly not predictive. Even the polls today in June aren't predictive. They just tell us, they're just a snapshot of where Americans are today. That's it. And by over-egging the pudding, as it were, or by misunderstanding what the purpose of a poll is meant to do, people work themselves into this sort of lather and like, the polls are terrible and the polls can't be believed, and reject the polls and just keep working. Like, and I get the motivation to work against Trump. I do. But it's not honest or good information to say the polls can't be trusted or the polls were wrong last time. JMM's got the perfect point. People treat polls like the Delphi Oracle. And this is why I wanted to rant a little bit. That's just not how it works. So there's also this urban legend that the polls got it wrong in 2016. Well, let's look. All right. Here were the final. Okay, another thing about polling. And it's a frustrating thing about polling, but it also makes sense. The closer you get to an election, the more accurate the polls become. It's kind of dumb, but it's true. If you think about it, if you turn a water on to boil, right? You put a pot on the hob or the stove, whatever you want to call it, and you turn it up to do boiling, and you go in 5 minutes and you do a temperature read. You're like, oh, look, it's 30 degrees. I'll do Celsius. Right? And then you come by 3 minutes later and you do another one. And you're like, oh, look, it's up to 42 degrees. And then you do another one as it gets up to like 70 degrees. And then the last one you take before it actually reaches boiling point, that's going to be the most accurate reading, except for the boiling point reading. And you know why? Because you measured the sample closest in time to the event that you were interested in. So it's not that the polls are wrong. It's that the polls are measuring a moving target. It's not that the polls have a problem. It's that people are changing their minds. And as people change their minds, the polling is lagged to catch up with that. So the polls taken 1 week before the election will be probably really close to what the end result is. You know why? Because at that point, people have made up their minds. People are paying attention. They're engaged. They may have even voted already. So you know that when they say, I voted for this person, it's not that they can still change their mind in a week's time. They've actually already cast their vote. And this is another thing. Like, sometimes people will tell a pollster something, and they don't even mean to lie. I've had this happen with my own focus groups. Oh, I'm thinking about voting third party for the first time. I'm thinking about switching my vote over here. And then they get into the polling booth, and they don't do what they said they were going to do. People intend to vote, and they don't. People say they're not going to vote, and they do. People are terrible at predicting their own behavior. And so from the outside, it looks like the polls are really inaccurate. But the real challenge is that people are chaotic. People are like, you're trying to, it's like herding cats. And they can see something and change their mind. Or something happens and what they planned on doing they can't do. Like they got a flat tire on the way to the polling booth. Like literally did. And they had to be towed. And they had to organize childcare. And they didn't make it. And they intended to. It was no fault of their own. That's not the fault of the polls. Or the pollsters. Or the person. It's just life. And that is why we have a margin of error. That is why we say, well, we think it's going to be between something and something else. Why does this keep bopping up and down? It's really annoying me. What are you, real clear politics here? Crap. So that's the other thing too. Anyone who tells you that polls in June are going to depress turnout in November because people are going to be complacent, oh my God, I want to put a mark on my face for how, no, that's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. So, polls are just, they're just information. They are a picture in a moment of time. They tell you where things are now. And the other one, when people say, don't get complacent. Well, yeah, of course not. Just because Joe Biden is up 10 points now, if you look at the history of presidential races, there is always a narrowing. I mean, maybe this time there won't be. I don't know. Trump is seriously a threat to our national security in ways that has never existed in American history before. But even so, there's going to be a narrowing of that gap at some point. And that's not scary. That's just going to happen. It's just going to happen. People are going to freak out. Look, he's catching up. Like, no, the races just tighten when people start paying attention and their choice becomes more real. Another psychological thing you can think about is that in June, or at any time, when you tell a pollster on the phone or on the internet or on your mobile phone how you're going to vote, that's just you speculating about what you think you're going to do in the future. That is not the same as putting your mark on a piece of paper. People might think they're going to vote for Biden, or think they're going to vote for Trump. Something's going to happen. They're going to change their minds. Even between when they were answered the question from a pollster and when they get in the polling booth. So let's add, that's not how the polls work, yes, from Hanzilla. Let's look at whether or not the polls really got it wrong in 2016. And they look at again, we've talked about the state-by-state polls, which are the ones, actually the polls that really do matter at the end of the day. I guess I should mention this too. National polls are generally not good. I would not put money on a result based on national polling. Remember what I said about how it's easier to get more respondents in a national poll than it is on a state-to-state poll? Well, because of that, it's less geographically linked. You can get people in Atlanta that pretty much represent people's opinions in Cleveland and be accurate in terms of the national picture. I have to turn this off. Real Clear Politics, I think it's because I put ads on. It is terrible. It's just flickering, and it really annoys me, so I'm going to have to just be selective on when I put it up. What was I saying? Oh, yes. So even though you can get people in the suburbs or in Atlanta who have similar opinions to people in Cleveland, obviously they vote in different places. So you can't, unless it's 10, 15 points, you're a gap, which is quite rare in presidential elections. You're really not going to be able to link a national result to, perfectly predict the outcome, because what a poll is asking people is how you're going to vote. And then gives you the popular vote. When you're asking a national survey, what you're really measuring is not the state-by-state results. You're measuring the overall national vote turnout and the split between the candidates. So that is why national polls kind of give you a flavor where the country is, but then you need to zoom in to those state polls because the states are where people actually cast their ballots that link to the electors in order to better understand where each state is, because some states are in play and some states aren't. And as I said before, state by state level polling is usually less accurate, and by less accurate I mean it has a wider margin of error. And it has a wider margin of error because they have fewer people, and the fewer people you have, the more you need a margin of error to account for the fact that you have fewer people. So if you have, let's say you have 4,000 respondents and you have a margin of error of 3.2%. I'm kind of making those up. And then you've got a different poll with 1,000 respondents and a margin of error. Oh no, that's a little too high. So what did I say? 3.2%? Yeah. And you've got 1,000 people and you've got a margin of error of 5.1% or 4.9%. Let's run up to 5%. That means it's a 10% swing from the midpoint, plus or minus 5% is actually a huge margin of error. It's 10 points of variation. That's not that precise. So it's not that it's a bad poll, it's just got a wider margin of error. They're saying we think the true value in the population is somewhere in here. We split the difference and we just give the midpoint an estimate here so we can compare it in terms of numbers. But let's say Biden's going at 46% in Wisconsin, and if you got a plus or minus 5% margin of error, that true value could be anywhere from 41 to 51, 47, whatever, 46 anyway. You know what I'm saying? It's 5 points on either side, so the range is 10%. I hate doing math in public, especially when I do weird numbers. Okay, so he's 45 instead of 46, and I have to carry ones. He's at 45%. That's easier in my brain. He's either at 40% in the state of Wisconsin or he's at 50%. Anywhere between 40 and 50%, and we're going to call it 45 because it's in the middle. So state polls I tend to be quite skeptical about unless I see multiple polls telling me the same thing, or the same poll over time having pretty consistent results. National polls are more accurate, but they're less, in terms of there's a smaller margin of error, but they're not as, you can't translate them into results for that reason. You guys still talking about goats and the cat and the thing? Right. So these were the results from 2016. And if you look at it, this is all general election Trump versus Clinton polling data. The sample here are all likely voters. Oh my gosh, let's just, yeah, okay. I'm going to go on the side because I will forget this. Polls can be done of all adults, registered voters, or likely voters. This is another thing you need to pay attention to. Who you ask will also kind of shape your understanding of the result. There isn't a right group of people to ask who they're going to vote. There isn't a better group. All of them have a different perspective on the same answer. If you ask all adults, regardless of their registration, who they prefer for president, Biden or Trump or some third candidate, you get the national mood. You don't get anything about voting turnout, but you get a sense of where the nation is as a whole on how warm or cold they are to the candidates. If you only ask registered voters, you have a sample of people who have a history of voting. So it is quite a good indicator that the people who talk to you who are registered voters will actually follow through and do what they say. So it is one of the more precise ways of narrowing down what your result is going to be. But the flaw in only asking registered voters is that you're then missing everybody who's not a registered voter. And people who aren't registered voters in your state might still vote. So if you limit your sample only to registered voters, it is inaccurate because you're excluding potential first-time voters or people who have just moved to the state, or people who've just turned, who've become old enough to vote since the last time. And that is not an unsizable population, potentially, depending on the size of your state and how mobile people are. So, again, all adults, you get some information, but it's imperfect. Registered voters, you get some really good information, also imperfect. I have to turn, oh my God, Real Clear Politics is crap. And our studio package would be perfect for me. I just need a calculator, but thank you, the Lucky Wanderer. All right, the last one is likely voters. Oh, well, then why don't you ask likely voters? The problem with, okay, so the benefits first. The benefit of asking likely voters, and I'll talk about the likely voter model as the problem here in a second. But the good thing about asking likely voters is it is a more accurate population potentially than just registered voters or all adults in your population. So you're trying to get the universe of people who not only have a history of voting, but also have, maybe they're highly motivated. Again, maybe they're from out of state, they have to register. What else? You're not excluding people just because they're not on the register. Right? That's a skew if you're only sampling people on the voting rolls or the register. The problem with the likely voter question or the likely voter samples is, how do you know who's a likely voter? Again, you can't trust that people who tell you they're going to vote will vote. People who didn't vote lie to pollsters and say they did vote and that they voted for the winning party. I mean, I actually, as part of my work for the British election study in 2005, oh, so many years ago, one of the things we did was we had surveyed all of these individuals who said that they had voted in the last election. And what we had to do was physically go down to the registers and look them up and determine whether or not they voted. And quite a significant number, like 50%, but we're talking about anywhere from 3 to 5%. People just straight up lied. I don't know who they voted for. I can't answer the recipe of that. But when, you look them up in terms of their postal code and whether or not we can validate that they actually turned out, they didn't. So the likely voter model it tries to predict who is most likely to vote, regardless of how people say they're going to vote. So things that they look at in a likely voter model might be a history of voting, like have you voted in the past elections, how interested you are in the election that's going on. Another metric is whether or not you identify strongly with the party, because people who have strong party identifications are more likely to vote than people who have weak party or no party identification. Education. There's a whole bunch of ways that that different polling companies create their own likely voter model. So there isn't a standard industry accepted likely voter model that all polling companies use. Each house, Gallup has their own, YouGov has their own, Ipsos Mori has their own, ComRes has their own. They all create their own likely voter models, and they kind of keep them secret. And so they want to, because they're in competition to be most accurate in predicting the election outcome. All right, so all of these methods, all of these populations that people can sample have pluses and minuses. There's not a right way to poll people. There are just a lot of different things that give you different understandings, different viewpoints. And I like to just take all of those pieces of information and kind of triangulate them and give a fuzzy sense of where I think things are. People like certainty, and polling is all about probability and error and fuzziness and, uncertainty, like you were saying, probability, quantum probability. So we have here Bloomberg's 800 likely voter model version with a margin of error of, this is one of the higher ones. This is interesting. Why is LA Times margin of error so high on what you would think is oh my God, look how crap that one was. Although the margin of error is 4.5%, that means that Clinton could have won by 1.5%. You subtract 4.5 from 3, and look at that. That's actually not so far off. That's a really high margin of error, and I'm suspicious. Maybe it's a panel? I don't know. See, because you've got one under here, which is very similar in sampling size. I'd have to look at their methodology. 2,220, and that margin of error, this makes sense to me, 2.5. That makes way more sense to me in terms of the number of observations they have. So generally, the lower the number of respondents, the higher the margin of error that you'll get. And I think the smallest one here is 2.3. Also, again, it depends on how similar or heterogeneity in the sampling population, in the population from which the sample was drawn. That's the phrase, the population from which the sample was drawn. So what did they say? Well, we've got Bloomberg said Clinton by 3, TIPP by 1, Clinton, YouGov by Clinton by 4, and so on and so forth. Monmouth did really poorly. Reuters, Clinton by 5. But if you look again at the margins of error and you subtract, Christy not happy. That's slightly better. If you subtract the margin of error, let's say 3 from Clinton's 4, you get 1, right? So you could be Clinton by 1 or Clinton by 7. She won by 2.1. So when you look at all of the polls together and you kind of smoosh them, you take all of their results, and there's a way that they don't just, like the Bloomberg one with only 800 likely voters will not be weighted as much as something that has more voters, because it would give Bloomberg's, it would be like distortion. So they have ways of weighting these aggregate polls. But there's this idea that if you just keep throwing, the magic of the aggregate is that errors that are found in individual house effects from YouGov versus Gallup versus Pew, whatever, the magic of the aggregate theory or view is that those errors will kind of balance each other out the more information you add. But anyway, at 2016, the Real Clear Politics average for what the prediction of Clinton's result would be in the popular vote, that's what they're predicting, because they're collecting just voters in the nation, and so they want to know how people in the nation are going to vote. Their average was 3.2, and Clinton got 2.1. So it was the polls were off by 1.1% in the aggregate. That's not wrong. The problem came in a couple swing states where, between voter suppression and other factors, Trump managed to pull the inside straight. So that's an annoying thing in my life. Is there anything else I wanted to talk about here? Oh, I guess we might as well, while we're here, talk about where things are now. And okay, so what are the takeaways? People misunderstand polls in fundamental ways. One is they don't properly take into account the I'll do it on this side of the screen because I was over here, you couldn't see my finger. They don't take into account the margin of error. They tend to treat these point estimates as real numbers, and those numbers are not real numbers. They're numbers with fuzz around them. They're numbers with uncertainty around them. Election 2020, I think. Let's have a look at this. And I know for sure that this will have, these little charts down here. So let's have, so 1, not taking into account the margin of error. 2, not really understanding the difference between what we can learn from a national poll versus why state polls have to be consulted if we want to know what a final result might be. Also understanding that a national poll will have less of a margin of error than a state poll, usually, in my experience. And so although we need these statewide or state level polls, they also come with more uncertainty than the national ones. It's easier to predict the national turnout than it is to predict the results in a particular state. And we just have to deal with that certainty. It's not the fault of polls. It's not a flaw in polling. It's not that the polls are wrong. It's that we have more uncertainty. And especially when you have a race that's, within, like Wisconsin was, the difference in Wisconsin was 20,000 votes out of 2 million. that's like what, 0.01% or 0.001%. Again, why am I trying to do calculations in my head on air? I don't know why I get myself into these problems, but the fact is that it is just, it's nothing. 20,000 out of 2 million that was what the factor was. And the idea that a poll was going to pick up on that, GTFO. So, more goats. Is that a goat or a sheep? So where are we now? Well, it looks like these are national polls, and there's fewer. Looks like the LA Times one seems to have gotten maybe not continued, maybe because it was so off or whatever, but it's not included here. Generally, these are running from 2.5% margin of error to what's the biggest, 3.5. So within a 1 point. Either way, and so I'm hoping that we've learned from 2016, 2018. The polls did very well. Nobody seems to remember the polling from 2018, or the fact that Democrats swept in 2018. That seems to have just gotten completely forgotten by people. But when we look at here, Biden being at 50%, that could actually be anywhere from 53 to 47%, and Trump could be anywhere from 39 to 33%. Fuzzy uncertainty. Keep these in mind. It is the case now that most of Biden's lead is outside of the margin of error. That makes me feel good. Generally, the two things that make me feel good about Biden's numbers are that they're pretty consistent. They seem to be pretty stable. There seems to be, even though with variation, because again, sampling, you're going to get variation. You're going to get samples that are a little bit higher, a little bit lower, but on average, unless they're going whoop, 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 if they're kind of like in the zone of the margin of error, you're finding a pretty stable trend line. And so that gives me hope. And also the fact that stability is oftentimes outside the margin of error. So there was a discussion about whether or not if Biden and Trump were within the margin of error, is that a statistical dead heat? And I guess, we always think of a statistical dead heat as being indistinguishable. So I don't think that if you've got a situation where, let's say, Biden's margin of error, where is my here, okay. Find my space because I'm reversed in the mirror. Let's say that this is this little. Can you see that? That bit is Biden's range. It's from here to here, and his midpoint is there. And Trump's has got a similar number, but his range kind of crosses over Biden's just a little bit. I don't think that's a statistical dead heat. I don't know if there's a magic cutoff point, but for there to be a statistical dead heat, you'd need basically only 1 or 2 points off the point estimate to be a statistical dead heat. But again, it depends on the range of the margin of error. So a lot of these things are a bit fuzzy. Life is uncertain. Deal with it. I know you guys all know. It's the people in the rest of the world who don't. Where was I? Yeah, let's have a look at Biden's numbers. Obviously, you'd rather be Biden than Trump right now. I mean, that's what we know in June. What we know in June is that it's much better to be the challenger in this situation than it is to be the incumbent based on how Trump is performing. And this is interesting. This is very interesting to me. Check out these trends. So here, maybe it's not that much of a point. We'll have to see how far it's gone. But interesting, June 22nd, the results. It's you would think that there would be. What is flummoxing me is that these aren't inverted. These patterns seem to be going up and down at the same time. So you see here, Biden is at 51.2, Trump is at 41.4, and then they both go down. Like Biden goes down to 49.5 and Trump goes down to 40. And I just find that kind of weird. What I'm used to seeing in polls, right? So I'm just sorry. I just went into my own little political science. This is going on here. What you normally see is this sort of inversion. You see Biden goes up as Trump goes down, or as Trump comes up, Biden goes down. It's like an accordion of people going, oh, real pure politics and your stupid ads. Yeah, it's all ad crap at its This is why I want why I put ad blocker on. And so for me, that's what this accordion of back and forth, back and forth. When you only have two choices, you tend to go one or the other. Some people say, I don't know, but you're only working with a fixed pool of possible adults that can respond. So this makes sense to me. What doesn't make sense to me, and maybe this is interesting because it seems to start to happen. So you get the holidays, you get the impeachment. Here, early January, this was impeachment time, right? And then Trump wins his impeachment, or no, he didn't win. He's found not guilty. He gets a little bump off that. And then you have people going to Biden, maybe shifting over to Biden. Well, I guess we've still got the primary going on. Okay, so let's get past the primary, because with the primary, Biden's numbers are always, of course, relative to his support within the base who are not Biden supporters. So if we move closer over here, let's call it April, when he becomes the nominee. It's quite obvious by, I'm sure, the end of March here. This is weird. Like, I'm very curious as to why here, once he's definitely the nominee, Trump's numbers go down, Biden's numbers go down. Trump's numbers go up, Biden's numbers go up. Here you get a bit of the inversion that I'm used to seeing. Here's the inversion. It's tracking really weirdly. And then here you start to get kind of an expansion. But yeah, these numbers are really odd. Like, we'll have to see. Maybe by the time we get to November, nobody will pay attention to these. But I find it especially strange. Maybe people are just getting turned off or tuning out, or they're frustrated. I'm not quite sure. But it seems very strange to me that Biden and Trump sort of here, in April go down. Anyway, when it comes to the result in November, this will tell us nothing. June numbers tell us nothing. But I'll tell you, but you'd rather be up 10 points in June than down 10 points. So please go out into the world with this education. And if you take nothing away, it would be polls are not oracles. As someone said in the chat, thank you very much. They're not crystal balls. They're thermometers. A poll tells you a good poll tells you where people are now. And that's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. So, I think that's about all I have to say. Okay. I'm going to check the chat and see if you guys want to, I see people have opinions on things. So, let's see what you guys have to say. Any other not goat-based things. Goats. Interest in politics is hard to quantify, I suppose, Lenny writes. Yes and no. Jein, as the Germans would say. Interest in politics can be asked in a couple of different ways. It's not a single metric. It's oftentimes considered part of the cognitive engagement model. To what extent are you cognitively engaged with information? So one of the things that you could do is, one, you can ask people, how interested are you in politics on a scale of, strongly agree to strongly disagree. I am interested in politics. The problem with that is, from my own research with Rosie Campbell, we know that women tend to think of what we would think of as of politics, things like education, healthcare, care for the elderly, these kinds of things that women disproportionately take up their time as unpaid labor, caring for others, and keeping track of the health of the family, getting on so and so to go to the doctor or go to the dentist or whatever. All of those sort of emotional and unpaid labor that women take on in society. They will be very interested in education, but not necessarily say they're interested in politics. And when we analyze this, I'm going to show you, I can't really show you the paper, it's behind a paywall, I think, but you can go read my paper with Rosie Campbell for British respondents, and I think it translates to other Western countries. Men are more people generally tend to think, when you say interest in politics, what they think of is party campaigning, foreign policy, and like people yelling at each other, like the partisan parts of politics. They are less likely to associate interest in politics with like education policy reforms. And we also find men express more interest in watching the fight. So men are more interested in like partisan politics and campaigning, and they report higher interest in foreign policy. And women express a higher degree of interest in education, the NHS in the case of the UK, and I think law and order was kind of even between them. But basically, women are as interested in politics if you look at the categories of policies. But if you ask people, how interested are you in politics? Women will think of people shouting at each other and go, no, I'm not. I don't really have the emotional space for that kind of crap in my life. And so just asking people if they're interested in politics is not a good metric. It's much better to look at, do they consume media? What media they consume? Do they have a strong or weak or no party affiliation? Do they report following the news, kind of things? And then you can ask them how interested they are in politics, obviously, as one part of it. But interest in politics is not as easy. We don't just take people at their word, basically. If you know anything about polling, is if you ask someone just a straightforward question like, are you interested in politics? We're not really going to believe the answer. We don't tell, people don't always know why they hold the views they do. I know it sounds crazy or silly, but people are systematically more interested in healthcare issues the older they get. And that is a function of getting older. And they think, oh my gosh, I'm just becoming more interested in healthcare. Like, no, you're getting older. There are factors that are leading you to be more interested that you're not consciously aware of. Things like that. So interest in politics it's not an easy metric, but it is one that we attempt to engage with and control for as part of oftentimes a cognitive engagement model. And did you bring a goat? It's a bring your own goat party today. You guys are talking about alpacas and goats. Which part of the show? Yes, goat-based. The goat-based part of the show. Coffee time. Yeah, go ahead. I am the goat. Thank you very much. Oh, you guys are so sweet. Goats make more of a meh, 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 meh sound. Was that a passable goat? Okay. Someone not talking to me. Fairly certain Biden will announce a VP when Trump isn't actively and maliciously screwing things up, so he can take the news coverage away for a little bit. Yeah, we'll just talk. Oh, we've gone an hour already. Okay, talked crap already. I can do this to wind up the show, but I have to take off this stupid flickering, real clear politics crap off my screen. You're the worst. When it comes to, here's why I want, oh God, give me the other one. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, here we go. Images for goat. Guys, go. This is what you asked for it. This is what you deserve. This one with smoking a cigarette. Quite dangerous, but also quite funny. What was the question again? The VP. I just want Biden to pick a VP because it's this vacuum is being filled by party infighting. I mean, maybe it's just because I'm on social media for the first time as much, or maybe so many people are, but there is just a war. There is a war happening under the surface between Warren, mostly it's between Warrenistas or Warren supporters and the K-Hive. There is a big face-off between supporters of Kamala Harris and supporters of Elizabeth Warren. And I don't see any good coming out of it. I see a lot of alienation. I see a lot of frustration. And honestly, this isn't a typical year where, you would have a big convention to roll out your vice presidential candidate. We're not going to have a physical convention really in Milwaukee for the Democrats, much to the consternation of the MythCon people. Losers. Fascist. How do you do an F? I'll have to look up for those white supremacists over and myth information. But given that situation, I wish he would just announce it sooner rather than later. We are already in a general election, and that vacuum, and maybe he's triangulating, maybe he's waiting to see. I mean, I understand there's no rush for Biden, really, and it doesn't, I mean, I prefer Harris, but am I not going to vote for Biden because he picks Warren? Of course not. You know, and I'm sure for the same for Warren people, you know, they want Warren, but if he picks Val Demings or if he picks Kamala Harris, we're going to go, no, I'm not going to get the vice presidential pick I want. Okay. You know, so it's stupid. It's a stupid thing to be fighting over. It's a stupid thing to kind of be pitting Democrats against Democrats over. And the sooner we have a unity ticket, the sooner we know who his pick is, the sooner everyone's hurt feelings can recover and everyone can start moving on. You know, like I was really disappointed when Harris dropped out. I think it was the right thing to do. She was, you know, in Iowa, it was an uphill battle. She wasn't catching on fire. It wasn't her year. And so she's like, I can spend Christmas in Iowa and New Hampshire, or I can spend Christmas in my family. And I'm not going to win no matter what I do. So I'm getting out. I'm not going to ask my supporters for money for a race I can't win. And I was disappointed, but you know, and was I thrilled with Biden? No, but am I glad that we have someone that so many Republicans can look at and go, he's a safe pair of hands. He doesn't threaten me. I trust that he's going to govern competently. Yeah, I'm really happy about that. And I've had time to mourn and move on. And we need to do that with our vice presidential pick too. There's just so much contestation within the the supporters, and we need to just move on. But and the other thing too, Lucky Wonder, although I get it, in a normal year, in a normal election cycle, you could probably find a moment of breathing space when Trump hasn't taken up all of the oxygen in the room with his incompetence or evilness or racism or sexism or whatever terrible thing he's doing. But I don't think we can. I mean, we've seen 5 years now of Trump, 5.5 years, and he just takes up all the oxygen. If you wait for Trump to shut up for a week, you're gonna wait forever. He's such a what's the word I'm looking for? There's a malignant narcissist. He's such a malignant narcissist. If you wait for him to give you an opening, it will never come. So, yeah, but as I said, I don't think Biden is in a rush. I don't think he's gonna push anything faster, but I wish he would. Goats like tea bags? Goats that climb trees? 538's informal YouTube poll on Biden's possible VP picks, because it's interesting to see a poll like that on a platform like YouTube. Oh, I didn't know about that, Metal One, so I'll have to go check that out. I don't think he will leave it that late, just more at a time when there's no news of Trump being actively useless. Fingers crossed. You know, because Trump gets all his validation from himself, so he will, you know, if I was a religious person, I would call him an antichrist. Ah, no! Okay, oh, we're pretty close. Oh, yeah, here's a good methodological question. I don't want to miss any of them, though. So, oh, okay, yes, I've caught up. Maybe that dip is the voters who did not want Biden as a first choice taking time off to come around. Yeah, that's very possible when you're talking about that little dip. Like, I'm going to take my Margles and go home. You know, maybe him becoming the nominee for some people were like, I quit. And then they went, oh, the alternative is fascism. You know, yeah. And that could possibly, yeah, I would actually consider that. I would like to explore that as I would test that as a hypothesis. I would go and look at, if I could, like, what was your preference? Did you prefer Bernie, kind of thing? So yeah, that might be I mean, I can't say one way or the other, but I think that's informed speculation that would be worthy of testing. The goats are all pro-Biden. Has the polling industry compensated for so many people getting cell phones and making them unreachable? Yes. Yes. There are two primary ways that the polling industry has tried to adapt to the expanded use of mobile phones. One is to make more of their polls adapted to a phone interface. So rather than even just trying to get somebody on the line, and they too, cause it is harder to get mobile phone numbers. It's it's not like there's a phone book for mobile phone numbers, so that can be random digit dialing can be a little bit. That's more of a national poll kind of tactic, but yeah. So one is to actually move to online polling and allow people to respond to polls in multiple ways. So you might get an invitation to, participate in a poll, or you might get a call and then someone will send you, I don't know, but you could get a phone call and actually answer it on your mobile phone that way, or you can use your mobile phone to answer questions. And another way that polling agencies are trying to increase their response rates. Ultimately, that's what it's coming down to, is that back in the day, you could call people randomly and they would give you their opinions for free. Like, they would just give you a half hour of your time for information that you would then sell to a client. That's not the case anymore. People, one, are busy. Two, they're suspicious. And three, they're just not willing to give you stuff for free. Like, they're not going to spend a half hour of their day doing you a favor. They've got stuff going on. And so as a consequence of a lot of different things, including people moving off of landlines and into more being completely cutting the cord, response rates have been going down. So another way that they encourage people, or they try to get a better representation of the sample of America, is to pay people. YouGov, I think, was the first company I knew of. I'm not sure the first one who did it, but you'd sign up with YouGov and you get like 50-cent credit for every poll that you participate in, and when it got to be 10 quid or 50 quid or whatever their cutoff was, they'd send you a check. The point of that was not to get 2,000 people and use those same 2,000 people over and over again. What those companies do is they recruit hundreds of thousands. They try to get a panel of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people this way, because they've got a lot of different, they've got marketing polls, and they might have something about football or television and political polls and whatever else. And so you might try to get a panel of 500,000 participants or 600,000 participants in your panel, and they're all signed up and you're paying them for their time and their opinions. And then when you need a poll, you take a sample from that panel. You take maybe 2,000 people out of that 600,000. And that's a way to kind of help replicate that randomness, even though it's not technically random sampling. It's from a panel. But the idea is that you then can weight the panel, or you can weight your respondents to be nationally representative. So if you end up with a population, your true population is 51% women and 49% men. Cis, trans, whatever, and unfortunately we don't have a real non-binary category in the aggregate like that. But if we take it, that simple dichotomy that they often apply and impose, but your sample is swapped, where you ended up with over participation by men and under participation by women, you can kind of tweak those results to make men only worth 49% of the total number of responses and jack women up a little bit to be 51. So there are ways that they also weight their samples to be closer to a national representative population. So when the one caveat, generally when you weight your sample to be nationally representative, if you have a lot of cases, then that doesn't really have too much of an impact. You're just tweaking, But let's say that you have 2 people who are elderly and have Black ethnicity, and that makes up 1% of your sample, but in the population, they're 4%. You can't just take those 2 people and magnify them, to be 4% when you just have 1% or whatever the number is. So when you have really small subgroups, if you try to just overweight them, you just make their opinions really worth a lot, and it really skews it. And that is why when I mentioned earlier, having a subgroup analysis of at least 250 people, there's that cutoff for that threshold, kind of for that reason, so that you don't just take 2 people and suddenly their views are distorted compared to others. I don't know if I've explained that well. I wasn't prepared to explain that, so hopefully you understood what I mean. If not, go look up weighting samples. That's because that's a fun topic. The U.S. electoral system confuses me as an Aussie, considering we used ranked choice voting. I wouldn't even know how to predict polling with ranked choice voting. I know that they've done it in the UK because they have, London has some sort of multiple vote system, yada yada yada. So yeah, clearly the other thing that's going to impact and thank you for bringing this up, Fox of Fate. The electoral system you have is obviously going to change the process by which the opinions you're looking at get translated into vote. So opinions in a first past the post system or a winner take all system like the UK or the US, those the outcomes of those might be slightly different than if you have a PR system, right? So where people's preferences are. So that's a good point. Me poorly. Goaty goodness. You guys just crack me up. Absolutely. What was this about shitty leftists? Google goats in a tree? Okay, all right. I will. What was that stuff about shitty leftists? Why am I coughing? My nose is starting to run for some reason. All right. I think that's where I was. All right, goats and trees. You guys ask, what am I have to. Come on. Goats and All right, I just feel like I've just discovered a whole new like sort of kink area of the internet. Goats and trees. Goats in pajamas. Goats in sweaters. Goats in palm trees. I want to be more specific than goats and trees. I want to see goats. Oh my god! Oh my god! No, that's not real. That's photoshopped. Clearly, come on. Seriously? No, these aren't real. That I could believe. That's just between two. That's not. Is that how goats work? Really? I feel like this is National Enquirer kind of stuff. This seems a little too far-fetched. It seems too much to be defying gravity to be real. Goats and palm trees. Who knew? Not me. Oh, okay. I have to watch. All right. This is probably going to get me copyright struck. But I think the sound is down for you guys. Come on. Get up there. I'm just going to... Oh my god! Look at him go! That is ridiculous! Best part of the show. Goats and... I don't understand. You hear that? Maybe hear a little bit of the music I've got coming through my headphones. Where is he gonna go? What do they do when they get up there? They just stand up there? Who knew? Who knew that my show was gonna end up being taken over by goats? Okay. I'll try to get through the comments here. Goats and trees. Okay, we got there. It keeps wanting to take me up. Every time you guys keep putting messages, but you see it. We did that one. Goat farmers. Oh yeah, even the shitty leftists are dropping out of the misnomers myth discussion BS. Sib Wolf, can you expand on that a little bit? I don't know by what you mean by the misnomers myth discussion. So I can't agree or disagree or even have an opinion yet because I don't have a clear understanding of what you meant and I want that before I continue. Hope you guys can't hear. My stomach is growling. I hope you guys can't hear that. Goats and trees. Yes, I am amazed. 538 Biden VP YouTube poll, about a month old. Okay. August 1st for the VP announcement. Yeah, it's traditionally around the time of the convention, and I think the convention is taking place in mid-August. Virtually, be primarily a virtual convention, unlike Trump, who's going to try to hold it in the middle of a pandemic and a hotspot. Perhaps he will choose a horse. Come on, Goats 2020. Doesn't know how to predict ranked choice voting, probably doesn't do Bayesian analysis. Bayesian statistics, yeah, I kind of understand Bayesian statistics. You have to take a whole special class. Well, I didn't do that as part of my master's. I've seen courses on Bayesian analysis, and I read a little bit about it when I looked at the study of police shootings, racial bias in police shootings, based on county-level statistics, not using the FBI data, but using like media-reported that was done consistently. So yeah, Bayesian, like I generally get the principle, but I couldn't describe it right now. It's not a Photoshop. They can climb anything. That's amazing. They can climb near vertical surfaces. Well, why isn't he Goatman instead of Spider-Man then? Seems to be Goatman is way more, I mean, I mean, I know spiders have 8 legs and stuff, but surely he should be Goat Man, not Spider-Man. They aren't a real animal. They're like some hybrid between a monkey, sheep, and an dumbass. No such thing as a bad goat segment for the show. Why do they climb trees, though? Because they can. Well, and on that bombshell, on that goat-based bombshell, I will go back to my original. Look at this. This is madness. Absolute madness. Can I get any bigger? I dislike Pinterest in ways you guys can't even imagine. Like, I just don't like anything about their format and the way they block stuff or organize it. It's just all crap. But these goats in trees are cool. All right, well, on that goat-based bombshell, I think it's time for me to wrap up because I went longer than an hour, which is what I was planning on doing in the first place. And I have other stuff to do today. I'm sure you guys do too. And also, I'm starting to cough a lot again, which I don't understand. I was fine for a while, then randomly, I get this in the happy hour too. I don't know why I get this coffee bits. But anyway. Oh, was the shitty leftist about MythCon? They like being tall. That cats like the same. Was the shitty leftist about MythCon? I don't know. We can talk about MythCon at some point. They're very annoyed that I keep linking their Better Discourse event to the hashtag Superspreader. But they're going to do an in-person convention in August in the middle of a pandemic. And they're going to try to bring people from all over the country to sit into one room and breathe on each other. It's gross. So anyway, but we're going to talk about them now. Yeah, bye everyone. Have a great Sunday. Wherever it is, whenever it is you are, we'll see each other again next time. I have been Christy. Yeah, you've been awesome. All of you. All of you have been the goat. All right, I'm going to end the stream now. Talk to you guys soon. Next week or before. Probably before. Okay. Bye.